Cato, Canto 1. If purgatory illustrates the journey of the Cathar believer towards the consolamentum, the first canto must indicate the beginning of the novitiate. We have no information about how it took place, but one can suppose that a meeting with a consolato was planned, under whose control and under whose guidance it would then be carried out. We'll see then what happens in the first canto. When Dante leaves hell, he sees the stars because it is night. The atmosphere is magical, and the verses among the most beautiful of poetry of all time, such as that gentle hue of oriental sapphire with which the canto begins after the invocation to the Muses, and in which vibrates all the emotion of one who seems reborn and sees the night sky for the first time. In fact, it very much deals with a rebirth rather than a resurrection, given that the journey takes place in the footsteps of Christ, and the exit from the infernal tomb, from the air of death, occurs, as is written in all the books, on Easter morning. Dante looks to the east and turns to the right, both positive symbols opposite to those in respect of hell, and here appears to him a solitary patriarch near me, his aspect worthy of such reverence that even son to father owes no more. Purgatory 1, 31-33. From a literal point of view, it is, even if the name is never given, Cato of Utica. But the function that, page 188, Dante assigns to him, that of custodian of purgatory, has always aroused notable perplexity, given that Cato was a pagan and, moreover, a suicide. This figure could, I use the conditional, represent the consolato under whose guidance, under whose care, the postulant must face the impassable spiritual path, or at least the first part of it. Various elements seem to corroborate such a hypothesis. Cato is presented as an elderly man with a long beard and long white hair. This doesn't correspond to the Cato of history, who died not yet 50. As regards instead the length of the beard and hair, Lucan reports that he, from the beginning of the Civil War, no longer cut them. The Cathar Consolati, too, did not cut their beards or hair, and they were in general elderly. Virgil makes Dante kneel before Cato. From a literal point of view, it doesn't make sense, because Cato isn't a god or even an angel. It was instead obligatory to kneel before a consolato, above all on the occasion of specific liturgical moments, such as that of the formal request to be admitted as a novice. Virgil says that per lui compare, to save Dante, there was no other way than this. The sentence can mean many things, but it could also allude, I use the conditional, to the liberation that according to the Cathars one could only obtain with the consolamentum. Then Virgil, still talking about Dante, says to Cato, he goes in search of liberty, so precious as he who gives his life for it must know. Purgatory 1, 71-72. The literal reference is to Cato of Utica's suicide, so much so that he continues the discourse saying, you know it, who found death for her, freedom, was not bitter. The efforts of the critics to make a pagan suicide the guardian of purgatory appear reasonable and even orthodox, aren't convincing. A better reason would be if this liberty is understood as freedom from sin. It's not certain that Cato took his life for that. 2, page 189, tell the truth. It was not even for political freedom, for a freedom from tyranny, but as Mario Fubini argues acutely, to remain faithful to himself. If one leaves aside the literal sense, the two verses adapt themselves perfectly and without forcing to Catharism. The Cathars yearned for freedom, not salvation. Yearning for freedom from slavery to earthly corruption, that is, from the chain of rebirth. For this freedom they were prepared to die, and they preferred to be burnt at the stake, as all the sources attest, rather than abjure. Dante's verses seem, therefore, to specifically delineate this horizon of faith, that freedom, the freedom that whoever enters on this path that leads to the consolamentum searches for. For them it was that precious that they were prepared to sacrifice their lives for it. Virgil, alluding to his suicide, says to Cato, "In Utica you left off the garb that will be bright on the great day." As we've already seen, the Cathars believed that on the day of resurrection all will have recovered their white robes. Cato welcomes Dante and says to Virgil, "Go then, but wind a smooth rush around his waist and bathe his face." Purgatory 1, 94 to 95. All the commentators note how Purgatory is rich with liturgical elements that have sacred significance. Perhaps, I add, precisely because it deals with the description of a set of rites that are part of a sacrament, of a sacred course, of which we have unfortunately lost almost every trace. It was night, then dawn comes, described with verses of poignant beauty. Daybreak was vanquishing the dark's last hour, which fled before it. In the distance I could recognize the trembling of the sea. Purgatory 1, 115 to 117. Page 190. Virgil washes Dante's face with the dew, and girds him with a reed gathered from the shore. We don't know, but it is more than probable that the Cathars would provide for a certain ceremony or a rite to mark the beginning of the novitiate. The canto closes with the same atmosphere of wonder that suggests a beginning, and with another image of rebirth. The humble plant, the reed gathered by Virgil, was immediately reborn. Dante, too, is reborn and is ready to undertake the ascent of the mountain.